Konnichiwa. This presentation concerns the issue of quality and assuring quality and how we do this. And part of this will be a discussion of the SPELL framework. The Greek philosopher Aristotle reminds us it is the sign of an educated man to seek accuracy only insofar as the subject allows. So, how do we assure quality? What do we measure? Do we measure the inputs and the processes, or do we measure the aims or the outcomes? And how to measure standards, experience, results? How do we carry out the evaluation? How do we audit what we are doing? A simple model of evaluation concerns the prescribed standards leading to conclusions or clear outcomes. We have to consider how relevant are these to the work that we do. Is standardization an important part of the process, or is it potentially problematic? Or could these be potentially catastrophic in that you adhere perfectly to the process, but the outcome was one that you didn't want? That in this case, the operation, that is the procedure, was a complete success, but unfortunately the outcome was that the patient died. Similarly problematic can be a model of an evaluation where you look at the method and then you look at the conclusions or the outcomes. The method, as we know, is everyone gets the same procedure, and then we measure what happens as a result of that. This is not a nuanced process or evaluation. So I'm going to speak about a process that can overcome some of these difficulties, which is called Participatory Action Research, which builds on the lived experience or the experience of the people involved. And this leads to conclusions which would include an outcome. But there are warnings here too. This approach is not without its problems, and we need to be mindful of effects such as the placebo effect, which participatory action research can be prone to. Also, potential danger is that which concerns confirmation bias. That is, we only look for things which confirm our particular point of view. So participatory action research then seeks to bring together science and practice. And it does this by seeking to understand and improve the world by changing it. At its heart is reflective, collective inquiry that researchers and participants undertake so that they can understand and improve on the practices that they themselves participate in and the situations in which they find themselves. And this reflective practice is directly linked to action, influenced by an understanding of the history, culture, and the local context, and is embedded in the social relationships of that context. The process of participatory action research then is about empowering people and empowering to lead, having increased control over their lives. So this is the one of the major aims of participatory action research, is to move people from being passive recipients of research to active participants. So the principles then of PAR, or participatory action research, is based around the concept of social change, which is intended to enable action that leads to a change or an improvement in a particular issue. And that is very much based on the lived experience of the people. And this is achieved by converging the science with that lived experience. Participation is driven by the research participants themselves and other individuals or agencies who are closely connected to those issues. That is, they have a stake in those issues. It is also reflecting the power of knowledge. That is, empowering those people who are the recipients of the research or the practice. It's very much a democratic model of communal learning, where everyone learns together, where knowledge is deliberately produced and owned by the stakeholders, that is, the people who are closely involved with the research. And it's about providing new insights. It's about breaking the mold. It's about looking at things in a different way than the traditional methods have led us in the past. And it's about collaboration. It's about collaboration between researchers, collaboration between researchers and people who use the services, the clients of the services. It's about getting people together on the same page to discuss common issues, which would include planning new programs, designing the evaluation of those programs, and the implementation of new approaches. Now, people sometimes ask me the question, well, what's the difference between PAR and lived experience? Well, PAR incorporates lived experience, that is, participatory action research incorporates lived experience, but it's much more than that. Because lived experience, in the absence of context, in the absence of a broader context, runs a number of risks. It runs the risk of the vox pop, that is, the last person you spoke to, and taking on board their impressions. It risks being held at the mercy of our various biases, confirmation biases, and placebo effect that I spoke of. But lived experience is important. We can't do without lived experience, but it doesn't provide evidence in the way that participatory action research does. With colleagues, Dr. Simon Lenton, paediatrician from the University of Bath, and building on his work with the Department of Health, and Professor Gary Mezibov from the University of North Carolina, we've developed a simple way of looking at this issue of evaluation. And this 4-stage method is designed specifically for social programs. And the first stage of this is to develop, stage 1, the hypothesis as to why do you think this particular program is worthwhile. And in doing this, you'd consider what in the UK we call the PICO framework. Who is this program for? What exactly is it? Compared to what are the results? What are the outcomes that you predict as a result of this particular intervention? Then you carry out the intervention or the program as planned. You don't deviate from that. You carry it out as planned. Then you look at the results. And are those results as you expected them to be? Are they better than you expected them to be? Or are they worse than expected to be? And once you have that information, then you can consider where you go with that, whether you need to make any changes to the program, whether you need to make any adjustments, just what are the changes that you need to make, and on balance, how successful was this? And once all of these things are in place, then you can revisit your original hypothesis and either make changes to it or to say that this is confirmed. Which brings us on to the very simple, but important issue: how do you audit it? And we've discussed these particular aspects, and all of these will form part of the basis of the audit. We will want to look at all of these factors and their effects. Turning to autism, it's important that we develop a method of auditing services, the very important considerations are that, above all, they're ethical and adhere to the principles of the least restrictive environment, and that they're rights-based. They very much reflect the rights of the individual. And some of the things that we've seen in autism research have not always been ethical, and they've not always observed or respected human rights. They need to be meaningful, and meaningful to all of the people who are participating in that particular part of research. And I think easy to apply, with, as the Greeks say, with nature, that if we adopt methods of evaluation which are over-elaborate, then they probably won't be done, or they'll be done badly. So we need to maintain this model of simplicity in our minds as we progress. So if we see this process then as this whole process of evaluation as a cycle, we begin by looking at appraising the particular program or the service, which will give us some data. We can review this. We can review these data. We can review the nature, the type of the program. Then we need to clarify what that actually means before moving on to implement. And then we can implement what it is we're doing based on the data that we have. Then we can carry out a further evaluation of that and develop more data. And those data can be analysed and provide us with information that can cause us to review the basic premise of the program itself. So this cycle of events, we like to call it the gift that keeps giving. So you're integrating the evaluation into the program itself, and you're evaluating as you're going. But it's important to have stage points in that evaluation so that you're not constantly changing things. So you agree up front that you will evaluate things, say, every 6 months or every 12 months or whatever it is, and you don't deviate from that unless you have a particularly good reason for doing so. So this does give you a systematic way of looking at the efficacy of your particular program. I'd also like to mention the notion of universal design, as in the design is useful and marketable with people with diverse abilities. This means the design is useful to all people, and the user experience is identical to all of the users. It's safe, it's secure, it doesn't isolate people or stigmatize anyone. For example, level entry access instead of stairs allows easier mobility and access for all. The second part is it's flexible. The design accommodates all individual preferences and abilities, such as tools that allow for right or left-handed use, level entrances or larger washroom facilities that allow for wheelchair access. For example, a drive-in shower fitted with a bench allows that person to be independent and to shower whether standing or seated. The third point is it's simple and intuitive. The design is easy to understand and operate and allows for different literacy levels and language abilities, provides prompts and feedback. Visual prompts are particularly valuable. For example, also the assembly instructions featuring graphic images are clear. Language is simplified for all users, including people whose first language is not English or not Japanese or not Chinese or and so on. So it needs to be accessible to all. The fourth point is it uses perceptible information. The design makes it easy to provide pictorial, verbal, tactile directions or instructions to communicate information effectively to all users, regardless of ambient conditions or sensory abilities. And it's compatible with different devices or techniques used by people who might, for example, have sensory disabilities. Images, site maps that are tactile with raised features, for example. The fifth point is it minimizes risks and accidents. The design minimizes hazards, risks of accidental or unintended actions by arranging commonly used elements in the most accessible locations, and hazardous elements are either removed or are shielded. Or warnings are given, or fail-safe measures are built in. For example, a warning sign with both text and graphics to alert people to a potential danger or problem. And the sixth point, it requires low physical effort. Design can be used efficiently and comfortably with little effort or fatigue. And this could mean allowing a user to remain in a neutral body position, for example, or avoiding repetitive actions, controlling the level of physical effort needed. For example, lever action handles make doors easier to open for everybody. You know, the big handle, everyone can then open those doors, including children and persons with limited dexterity. The seventh point is appropriately sized and spaced. The design incorporates enough size and enough space for approaching, reaching, manipulating and using, regardless of the user's body size, posture or mobility. In autism services, we also need to take account of the fact that people might be supported by one or two or even three other people. So we need to leave enough space for all of those people to be accommodated. And it should also reflect or accommodate assistive devices. We might have a service animal as well as personal assistants. Now, whether standing or sitting, the design provides a clear line of sight and allows for a comfortable reach, modified for a variety of hand or grip size. For example, a washroom with clear space both in front of and beside a toilet allows for maximum use of the facility for all users, including people requiring transfer for mobility devices. And we've seen access to toilets as well being very important, to be able to get into a toilet area without having to open cumbersome doors. A number of autistic people have found that they are reluctant to use public toilet facilities if they have to touch door services. So all of these things incorporate the important principles of universal design, which encompass the notions of equality, equity, and justice. That we need to be mindful that these adjustments are impactful on the narrative too, that we need to make life more accessible for all people at the same time as making opportunities and life accessible to autistic people. Turning specifically to the SPELL framework, which was developed over many years for the National Autistic Society, including Dr. Laura Wing, Dr. Judith Gould, Mike Collins, John Clements, Joe Powell, myself, and other colleagues working in schools and in services for autistic adults. This was very much a process of learning through doing. And it reflected the lived experience of the participatory action research experience of autistic people and professionals and researchers working in this field. Now, the 5 elements of the framework: structure, positive approaches and expectations and attitudes, empathy, low arousal, and links. If we look at the extremes, and Aristotle provides us with the example of the golden mean, where we should be looking at the middle ground, whereas both of the extremes should be avoided. For example, if we look at a structure, having too little structure leads to chaos and a lack of boundaries and resultant high anxiety. Whereas if we look at too much structure, we're looking at people being rigidly controlled and overbounded. So the true essence of structure is to aim in the middle ground, where people have autonomy, people have enough information to make their own decisions, but that this is very much controlled and regulated in a way that is helpful to people to make it accessible. If we look at positive attitudes and expectations. We know that in autism, having too little of this, if we're looking at a lack of, then we find the lack of positive attitudes and approaches leads to negativity. It can lead to it can lead to denial of difficulties. It can lead to a whole host of untoward circumstances. So it's the middle ground, it's the middle column that we should always be aiming at. And either side of this, we will see a departure from the golden mean. So the golden mean is the desirable middle ground in the middle column that we need to always keep in. The concept of excess and the concept of too little. So if we look at the SPELL self-audit, then this was a tool that was developed to look at how the SPELL framework was implemented in a variety of different environments. And SPELL is designed to be a clear, logical, memorable process. So the mnemonic SPELL actually stands for something significant: structure, positive approaches, expectations, empathy, that is being able to see the world from the point of view of the other person, or the autistic person in this case. Low arousal, that is paying attention to the environment, paying attention to how the person interprets all forms of oral or tactile stimulation, keeping calm, non-confrontation. All of these things will reduce arousal, physiological arousal, and links, having good connections with other people. So we need to bear these things in mind when we're thinking about a framework for evaluation. And we do this by firstly looking at the inputs, that is the resources, which would include the people, the environment, facilities, training that they receive, the ethos of the particular service, and the ideas that are there. Then we would look at the processes, that is what policies are in place to support this, the procedures, the application, and the infrastructure. And these are all important in underpinning what happens and that on the delivery, that is the practice. So we would expect to see things like acceptance of autism as a difference, not a disorder, to identify the disabling effects of autism and to deal with these, and which would support also a sense of belonging and connection. So acceptance of the person, providing opportunities for belonging and connection, and how are these evidenced? And as part of this is an understanding of the experience of that person through listening and empathy and support. And we should remember that the audit process is that it's a process. It's an ongoing process. It's systematic. It's a systematic method for ensuring the continuity of improvement. That we're not going backwards and forwards. We're not fluctuating because of the ideas of the moment. You know, someone comes in with a bright idea, let's do this. It might be a good idea, but it doesn't actually lead to any progress unless it's part of a systematic process. It's important, well, I would say essential, that we manage to obtain expert autistic experience. That is, from autistic people to comment and to provide feedback and to provide ideas into how these matters can progress. That is, we're making use of lived experience and we're allying this to the scientific part of the process. Now, it's important also to note that the SPELL audit format is structured to provide a basis for discussion. It shouldn't be used as a checklist. It should be there to stimulate the right kind of discussion so that we can begin to get to some of the nuanced solutions to many of the issues that we will come across. The audit process is also incredibly helpful when we come to be looking at strategies or particular activities, organising a specific environment and having a very clear framework for how that environment might be, and for putting people in control of their lives and to make them more autonomous or help them to become more autonomous. Also, in these days of accountability, it helps us to demonstrate the effectiveness of support and to inform the processes that will be needed. For example, what sort of training will staff need in order to be effective in supporting autistic people? Now, some of the traditional methods and traditional models of training have not been that good because they haven't really taken account of this notion of participatory action research or lived experience. I'm going to show you some examples now, some extracts from the audit process. The SPELL audit is a much more comprehensive document which I can share separately with Professor Uchiyama, who can then arrange for this to be sent to you. If you would like to get this translated, then that would be fine with us. So we want this document to be as helpful as possible and useful if you feel it's helpful in your particular context. Now, the audit process then is to systematically consider the environment, the processes, including the policies and training, the delivery. And we would score this as follows. If it gets a score of 1, it means it's not achieved or not in place. A score of 2 would be that it's partly achieved, that some of the elements of SPELL are in place or evident. And a score of 3 would mean that it's fully in place, fully achieved. Starting with the environment, it's sometimes quite evident and obvious where changes need to be made, but not always. And it's helpful to us to have a systematic way of looking at this. For example, just the way that you approach a building. When you approach the building, are the approaches clearly identified? And are they uncluttered? Or are they confusing to approach? Is the language that's used, is it, the signage, is that clear? And is it both symbolic as well as in written format? Is there a map of the facility available to people so you can navigate your way around it? And are things like clocks very simple, but are these accessible? Can you see them? And are they correct? Also on the environment, if we're looking at structure in the environment, are the rooms and internal areas kept clearly described and clearly designated and marked? Are toilets available, readily accessible to people? Is there enough storage, and is this obvious to people? Are activity areas clearly defined and labelled? For example, are rooms numbered to make them more accessible? The floor areas, are these confusing? Are these clearly defined? And so on. I will just go through the next few slides to give you some idea as to how we can begin to systematically look at each of these areas. Also on structure. And then looking at positive expectations, positive attitudes, approaches and expectations. And you can take these away and look at them at your leisure. And turning to empathy, again, how the SPELL framework audit can work in this situation. Again, on empathy. And on arousal, and looking at low arousal environments. Quiet area, do people know how to escape from noisy areas? Are these clearly marked out to people? Lighting. Is there sufficient natural light? Is lighting down lighting or up lighting? As we know, the effects of these can be, and so on. Again, on low arousal. Low arousal. Controlling a temperature. And on background noises. All of these things require careful thought and systematic approaches and evaluation, and we found the 1, 2, 3 scoring can be really helpful to us in this. And then on to links. Connectedness with the local community, connectedness with key individuals. Accessibility. And transport. And by looking at it systematically, it develops data that you can then see change over time. And this is the important thing that we need to be mindful of, is that it's not just a question of assessing the here and now, although that's important. It's important to assess change over time. So if we pay attention to these factors now, and where we might have scored a 1 or a 2, when we come to reassess, having put the changes in place, then we can see our overall score and our ratings increase. And so this can actually be a very good indicator for staff working in these facilities, and also for the users themselves, to establish whether or not progress has been made. So to end, I would make the point here very clearly that autistic children and adults are the people who are receiving these services or our input in whatever way are our main resource. This is where we can get most of the information that's going to inform our approach and inform our approach to audit. So we need to be able to listen to them. And by listening, it isn't just a question of opening our ears. We need to open our minds to different ways of doing things. By listening, many of these issues can become clearer and allow us to empathize with the experience of that person. And then through empathy, we find other and novel ways of intervening, new approaches. For example, the mentor program in London came about through listening to autistic adults who said that they felt that the most important thing for them would be to have a personal mentor to connect them to their own experiences and also the experiences of the wider community. Someone that they could trust, they could rely on, where they had this strong connection. If you remember, many of the autistic people we've spoken to said that they need ABC, that is, acceptance, belonging, and connection. That by acceptance, accepting who they are rather than who people would want them to be. By belonging, by not excluding people or expecting people to conform, but offering them a chance to belong, feel part of the world, part of their community, because their experience very often is the opposite of that. They don't feel part of the community. People feel excluded, people feel isolated, and so on. So our service approach must always have this ABC at its heart: acceptance, belonging, and connection. And the mentoring program provided a key part of all of these things, in that the mentors would accept, the mentors would provide an environment where the person belonged and felt they belonged, and also essential connections to people. It's also important to note that this enables us to do things with people rather than to them, and the power relationship is very important. And often we hear about person-centered care or person-centered support. We need to be mindful that this doesn't become a control exercise. We are saying we are putting the person in control, but how often is that untrue? And it's really, we will only allow them to be in control as far as we allow them to be in control. And this is something that we need to reflect on. Is it true control, or is it control without permission? And is this really then person-centered? So we must all learn to listen, and listen in different ways. And we can learn through doing. And I think the audit process is a very effective way, or can be a very effective way, of us learning through doing. With that, I thank you very much for your attention. I will be sending on the SPELL audit to Professor Uchiyama, and I hope that this is helpful to you. So thank you very much indeed.